Okay. The French government just collapsed. What we were talking about that Britain had possibly had some serious financial issues, but it seems like French has some serious financial issues. So the government collapsed. Is that what happened?
It is absolutely true. Now, I think the underlying realities about Britain and France is that France, in some ways, is in a stronger position than Britain. It has, as I understand it, bigger reserves. I don't mean government reserves, but I mean savings. In the French save better than the British do, so there is still a lot of wealth in France, which could be used to stabilise the situation. And France, in some respects, has a more competitive manufacturing economy than Britain does. And as I understand it, it runs a trade surplus.
Mhm.
So logically, it should be in a better position to ride out this storm. But what has happened in France, as it has happened in Britain, is that the country, France, has lost trust in its political class.
Mhm.
They feel that the political class in France is simply not interested in France or the welfare of
Mhm.
the French. It is constantly asking them to make sacrifices so that it can advance its own projects, whether in Ukraine or wherever, European
Mhm.
integration or wherever. And the result is that we have a political crisis in France because French governments aren't interested in the problems of France and aren't able to build a consensus in France to deal with the underlying problems that are steadily growing there. And that political crisis can very easily become an economic one as well. So it's a very, very difficult situation. And at the center of it is this extraordinary man, Emmanuel Macron, clever in many ways, very, very vain, and clever but not wise.
Yeah. And like you said, very vague. He has this confidence about himself so much, and even though it's pretty obvious, do you think he can until the next election he's safe, or is it now shaking? I feel like there's a lot of pressure on him to resign or something. I mean, something need to give.
He needs to go. I mean, I think the idea of another year of Emmanuel Macron at this time is an appalling one. I think France has had either 4 or 5 prime ministers over the
Uh-huh.
last 12 months, or is it
Yeah.
24 months? Anyway, I mean, we have complete instability in France. Macron's popularity is down to 15%. I mean, 15% of the people of France support him. I'm surprised myself that it is even that high, to say it straightforwardly. The point is that the longer he stays president, the more unstable politically the situation in France becomes. Because anything that he proposes, any prime minister he puts forward, is going to be rejected because people in France are disgusted by him. Now, what he needs to do is step down. There can be elections both for the presidency and for the parliament. More likely than not, they will be won by Marine Le Pen's
Mm-hmm.
party.
Mm-hmm.
And may I stress, I am no fan.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an awful lot about Marine Le Pen that I absolutely do not like. I
Yeah.
mean, ideologically, I am not close to her at all.
Mm-hmm.
Quite the opposite, actually. But at least at this time, she perhaps can obtain a majority and provide France with a government. And then a government can start to do things, and then we can have a real politics return to France, government and an opposition, and perhaps some degree of sanity and balance can be returned to the problems. One of the things I have to say about Le Pen is that at least she does understand that the problems of France are in France, and she is
Mm-hmm.
concerned much more, I think, than Macron is about dealing with those problems in France than Macron is, who talks grandly about, policy, sending French troops to
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine, uh, France, partnerships with Asian countries, all kinds of things, which are very, very detached from the everyday needs and realities of the French people.
Now, speaking of prime minister shift, changes so frequently. Japan, the Japanese prime
Yeah,
minister also steps down.
yeah.
Japan faces some challenges too, not least the trade problem with the United States. But I feel like this prime minister, he was in office less than a year. One cannot blame everything on him.
No.
So there is some underlying problem in Japan as well, isn't it?
They are indeed, and I'm going to say something. I think this is in some ways a disturbing development because
Hmm.
what I understand, and again, I'm not a huge expert on Japanese politics, but that the dominant party there, the Liberal Democratic Party, is now splitting.
Hmm.
And there is an old conservative, old guard, which was the one that we used to know. They were nationalist, they were
Hmm.
often corrupt, they were not particularly likable people, but they were pragmatic in a kind of a way.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, within the party now, there is a very hard line, very nationalist, very revanchist
Hmm.
group, which appears to be gaining in strength. And I can't help but think that what is happening is that Japan is moving further and further towards an ever more extreme revanchist policies.
Hmm. Yeah, that's lots of the people in China see that as well. That the
Mm.
seems like the candidates for the next prime minister, they
Yeah.
all that yeah belong to that group. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, China watch this closely. But remember one thing though, what China is saying is that Japan needs to be very, very mindful of
Yeah.
this time around if they are going to be aggressive towards China. Today's China is a very different China. And if Japan dares to do anything, including interfering with the unification effort by China with Taiwan, uh, China will not hesitate. Japan is the one country China will not have any problem to. You can revenge, China can revenge too. So
Absolutely.
Japan needs to be clear about that, you know.
Yes, and there has been an enormous change in the balance of power. I remember reading, I think it was about 2 years ago, an article, an editorial actually in Global Times, in which they made the point there that relative to the size of China's economy today,
Mhm.
Japan stands at about the same position that Taiwan did in
Mhm.
2000.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
this is the scale of the shift. I suspect, by the way, this is what's driving a lot of this nationalism in Japan.
Mhm.
That they've
Mhm.
been used ever since the 19th century to be, the richest and the most
Mhm.
powerful Asian country, or at least in their own conception, they've been the most powerful Asian country. It's very difficult now to maintain that belief, and I think this is probably a lot of what's causing a lot of these things. But you're absolutely right. They do need to be very, very careful. I doubt that they are. And I
Mhm.
don't think they have any understanding of the risks that they're running. And unfortunately, the Americans are whispering into their ears
Mhm.
all the time and
Mhm.
telling them, um, China is your threat, enemy, China is your adversary, the Chinese hate you, the Chinese want to conquer you. um, why don't you come together with us, support Taiwan?
Mhm.
We can defeat China together. And then who knows, maybe China will break up. I know there are people in America, certainly there are in Britain, who still fantasize about that. And then
Mhm.
who knows, you might be able again to have your little bits of it, just as you did before the Second World War. So, I mean, there are these whisperers, and I'm afraid, they're not, I mean, they are, if they're listened to, they will pull Japan into a disastrous direction.